So the Oklahoma Sooners kick off week 1 of the 2022 season in a totally different fashion than they kicked off week 1 of the 2021 season. Today, we need to break down Oklahoma's victory over UTEP, what surprised me, what stood out, and everything in between. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I need to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, Y for yes, N for no. Were you happy with Oklahoma's performance week 1? And let me know what you're thinking. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification as I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed this content, like and comment down below, as those interactions, though seemingly small, are massive to content creators such as myself. But having said all that, let's jump right into this. And I started off this video the way I did for a really important reason. Because last season when Oklahoma started their 2021 campaign, they were able to get a victory, but it was a close victory over a team that, though Tulane was good, was a team Oklahoma should have handled much easier than they did. Fast forward to a year, and this is exactly what you want to see out of your team in an opener. An inspired Oklahoma, a team that looks ready to go, and more importantly, wants to go. So let's break down some of the most intriguing things I saw on Saturday from the Oklahoma Sooners, and let's start with the most impressive part for the Sooners in my opinion, which was that defensive front. Because all through the offseason, even when the hire was made, I've maintained I think Todd Bates, from an assistant coach standpoint, was the best hire Oklahoma made. Now, that's not to say that there aren't several others that were extremely good hires or could be argued as better. I'll certainly hear the arguments. I'm a little bit biased because I love defense and specifically the defensive trenches, and Todd Bates has been such a consistent force in college football in that aspect. When I look at those Clemson defenses, there were not many weaknesses on those defenses whatsoever. But you want to know a strength every single year? It was that defensive front. Reggie Grimes, for instance, was an individual that had a huge day for the Sooners on Saturday, notching 2.5 sacks to go along with more tackles. He's someone that I think is going to really benefit from Todd Bates and Brent Venables' defense and the way they utilize their defensive front, and certainly he was not alone because the whole of that Oklahoma defensive front I thought played really, really well. You saw the strength of what the transfer portal can provide, and a Jonah Luulu and a Jeffrey Johnson able to contribute really positively for the Oklahoma Sooners. So that's the first thing that really stood out to me, was the pace that the defense was playing, but that defensive front and the tenacity they brought to the table. I thought that was very, very impressive. The other thing I thought was really telling was the pace of the offense. We know Jeff Lebby's going to go fast. We know he is very in tune with what he wants done on the offensive side of the ball. Now, because of that, don't be surprised if you have some early season offensive penalties, which Oklahoma had during the early portions of this game. Whenever you have an offense that goes that fast during the early portion of your season, you're kind of prone to penalties because you're really still figuring out the timing of everything. I've said this multiple times, but it absolutely deserves to be said again. You can practice a tempo offense. You can use it in scrimmages, this tempo offense. But until you get a live action opponent in front of you, it's always going to be a little bit different doing it in practice and scrimmages than against an opponent, and that's the best way to learn it. So that's something I think is going to be tremendously positive for Oklahoma moving down the stretch. Once they get acclimated to it, once they can clean up on the penalties, which there weren't many, but the penalties that occurred I thought were conducive not to not being disciplined, but conducive to the pace of the offense, and it's very normal in the early portions of the season when you see an offense go that fast. They're probably going to have a few penalties here and there. But I think whenever we saw what the pace of the offense allowed for Oklahoma to do, it goes without saying. 21 points in the first quarter really was a way to start off this game, and it made a lot of Oklahoma fans very excited. Speaking of the offense, let's talk about Dillon Gabriel, someone who had some really big moments in this game. This, I think, is going to be a big year for Dillon Gabriel because of the weapons he has at his disposal. Marvin Mims, Theo Weiss, Jaleel Farouk. Then you talk about the running back room, Marcus Major, Eric Gray. There's a lot to be excited about. Now, is Dylan Gabriel perfect? No, but I don't expect you to be perfect week one. The deep shot is something that's going to have to develop, and just like the soliloquy I gave when it came to the tempo of the offense and how you can practice it, you can do it in scrimmages, but until you get in front of an opponent, it's really not a one-to-one translation, so too the deep ball argument carries over. You can practice the deep ball, you can scrimmage the deep ball, but until you get a live action opponent in front of you that's going to do things a little bit differently, you can't really script for it. So the deep ball is something that's going to emerge as the season progresses for the Oklahoma Sooners. So for Oklahoma fans, how should you feel moving into Kent State? Well, I think the answer is very excited. You get another opponent that if you show up with your lunch pail ready to go and prepared for the game, you should come out victorious. Look, there is something to be said about playing a Utah like Florida did, because if you come out of that game victorious, you get such a real view as to who your team is. You've already faced such adversity that's going to help you for the season to come. But there also is something to be said for playing teams that allow for you to make adjustments, that allow for you to continue developing more depth, such as a UTEP or, in this case of next week, a Kent State. All due respect to both of those institutions because, as I said, they're not going to lay down and give it to Oklahoma. Oklahoma will still have to take it, but it does allow you to continue to develop multiple pieces on your team. So if there was one thing for Oklahoma that I think should be cleaned up during the Kent State game, what would it be? And it would probably be the secondary. Because if we look at this game and see how UTEP's offense was able to generate anything, it wasn't through the run. And that's exactly why when I started this video, I highlighted the defensive line for Oklahoma as something that really impressed me. Because they stifled the run for UTEP. UTEP was only able to get 28 yards on the ground, but through the air, they actually had 288 yards more than Oklahoma had through the air. That's something that should be cleaned up as the season goes. New coaches everywhere, so I can't say I'm super surprised. But nonetheless, it is something that the Oklahoma Sooners will look to clean up as the season progresses. But ultimately, I can't wait to hear from Oklahoma fans. This is about as good of a way to start your season opener as you could have, and it really highlights the difference of what I was trying to say a year ago. Oklahoma won the game last year, sure, but they didn't look like the inspired Oklahoma team that we saw Saturday. That was a team that looked like they were having fun, that they wanted to be there, that they were excited to play, and that they looked inspired to play. And that, I think, is a much better place to be walking into week 2 than we saw last year. Hop down in the comments, let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.